Go ahead.
We're good now. I just have the YouTube stream started. So go ahead, Councillor Hutchison.
Okay, so I'm just calling the meeting to order. We've got the approval of the agenda. I don't think there's any addendum. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Councillor Bohm, Councillor Kiley, all those in favor of the agenda? Okay, that passes. Confirmation of the minutes of Wednesday, January 15, 2020. Can I get a mover? Councillor Sanik, secondary Councillor Bohm. Any additions, subtractions, any problems with them? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the minutes, passed. Disclosure of pecuniary interest, don't see any. No delegations, no briefings. So now we're at item 7, business, and that is 7A, report received from the Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee. I'm going to ask, should we do the report card first and then it's done? What does staff think?
From the clerk's perspective, that would be fine. It's just a rote piece of business. So if you want to amend it to deal with that first, I don't think there's any issues with that if the committee's okay with it. Okay,
so not the way you're supposed to do things, but amending the agenda to do 7A2 at 7A1. Councillor Bohm, seconded by Councillor Sanik. All those in favor? Thank you. Okay, so on the report card, any questions or comments? Seeing none, there's a motion already there. Can someone make that motion? Councillor Sanik, seconded by Councillor Bohm. All those in favor? Hi, Councillor Neal. We've been waiting. We didn't wait for you because this is all pro forma stuff. We just dealt with number 2 as number 1 of 7A. Okay, so we've done that. Now we're back to the main point of this meeting. 7A, now 2, housing homelessness strategy and policy amendments. Does staff have any comments they'd like to make as introduction?
I think CAO Hurdle will provide a quick introduction.
Okay.
You may go ahead, Lanny, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So I'll provide a brief overview in terms of the report. So this report was actually discussed at the Housing and Homelessness Committee last week. The reason why it's being brought forward now has to obviously do with some of the challenges we've seen around housing and homelessness in the last couple of months, and in trying to provide the committee and council with an overview of the continuum. So, you know, we've had many reports in the past where we've presented either different initiatives or projects that are focused in specific areas, but it's pretty rare that we get a chance to bring a report that starts with really the shelter system all the way to the housing continuum that includes the 80% market rent type of apartments that we are involved in making contributions to construction. So we wanted to provide council, committee and council with that overview and a number of recommendations in each area, and trying to address some of the challenges that we've seen in the last couple of months. We know that obviously summertime is challenging for meetings, and that's why we've tried to fast track that so it could make it to council for August. So in the report, there are a number of different recommendations that range from changes to policy and trying to prioritize, for example, homelessness in terms of our wait list, to changes in some of our reserve funds that would allow us to access more dollars to be able to contribute to more affordable housing units. So that's generally the range of the report and the recommendations that are included in there. And I'm sure you have a lot of questions, so I think I'll leave it at that for the opening comments, and we will be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee? And this is what I think I'll do. I'll give each counselor a chance to ask 3 questions, okay? And then we'll come back, all right? But given the time shortage, just make sure everybody gets to ask something, all right? For the counselors that just arrived, Counselor Neal, Counselor Stroud, at 7:30 we lose quorum. And at 7 o'clock, I think is it Counselor Kylie that has to go to pick up your wife? Yeah, okay, fair enough. So that's the circumstance. So any questions from any counselor? Okay, Counselor Stroud, then Counselor Kylie.
I'm on my phone. Can you hear me?
We can see you and hear you.
Okay. My question is it's good to go first, I guess, because it helps lay the framework. It helps tie in the framework in a very simple way to anyone that might be following at home. There's a couple of numbers that I'm interested in. And one of them, we have a very good idea of if you read the report, and also if you remember previous reports. And it's related to the creation of affordable housing units. We all know that issue and that suggestion. I mean, it's an obvious solution for any housing problem. So here we have a mixture of different things in the report, but one thing I think we need to be clear on is sort of what the range is for the cost per unit when we, the capital cost and the operating cost, when we build units. And I know that there was an announcement last week about 5 units, and the cost was 625,000. I believe that's a very easy number to get your head around. 5 units for 625,000 was 125,000 capital cost per unit. And I'm wondering, how does that compare? Doesn't have to be very detailed, but I'm looking for a cost range for a per unit, for a new unit build per unit in recent history for what the city has done. That particular example, it came to an even 1/8 of a million per unit, or 8 units per million. Is that sort of in the middle of the range of what we can expect for the capital cost? How does it compare? So I don't need an exact figure, but I need to know how close that is to the usual cost for new builds, so that when we're doing budgeting, we can easily say, well, we can get 8 units for $1 million and so on. And also I need to know a little bit more about the operating costs, depending on the model used. And that might be something it might be a little bit more detailed. Those are my 2 questions: are the capital costs and the operating costs for new build of affordable housing units.
So can everybody hear me? Great.
Yes.
I will definitely, through you, Mr. Chair, try to start answering that question. Really, the cost per unit, it's not necessarily, as you kind of alluded to it in your question, is not necessarily a set amount that we can, kind of say, well, it's always X or it's always Y. As you can probably recall in previous reports and previous kind of requests to council, that number does typically range depending on a couple of things. So for instance, the one thing that we always look at is the percentage of affordability. So you probably recall that we use 80% average market quite often as kind of the max, I guess, of affordability, or the highest range of rent. We also sometimes look at 60%, and for instance, in the proposal or the project that we're working on Bath Road, we have units where the affordability is 60%. So those, for instance, influence kind of how much capital is needed to kind of get the project built. Historically, and I do apologize because I haven't been able to run those numbers, but the capital contribution per unit has been ranging between $50,000 to $150,000, again, depending on, for instance, if it's 60%, if it's 80%. The other piece we would be looking at is also the kind of the total cost of development and the kind of the different kind of investments that are being done to get the building built. Obviously, ideally, and as for the example with the 27 rights that you're referring to, we do have multiple levels of government that support with contributions. So it is hard to really say, oh, it's typically X or it's typically Y, but it is really kind of, we really look at the bigger picture of the builds. The other thing is the length of affordability. Again, ideally, we have developments that are affordable in perpetuity, so ongoing. We also have historically had agreements where the affordability range is 20 years or 25 years. So again, that would also influence the capital contribution in the beginning of the builds. The other piece, there are some expectations, there's some max contributions that we can do depending on kind of the actual cost of the build. So let's say the development of a unit is $250,000. We would also have expectations from, if we're using, for instance, provincial funding, that we're not able to use, that we can only tap into a certain percentage of that for a capital contribution. And the last I will say, and potential, perhaps CEO Hurdle has something to add to that as well, but the last thing I will say to your operating question, again, typically as a city, the only time we get involved in ongoing operating dollars is with our social housing portfolio. If we're looking at, for instance, the supportive housing model, we are, and you might recall this in our Lower Union supportive housing, we are really kind of looking at our partners to look at kind of those ongoing operating costs. We do know, again, depending on the model, if it's a 24/7 supportive model versus a 9 to 5 during the week supportive model, that obviously those ongoing costs will look very different. And if it's, for instance, a project with partners such as Anguinada or AMHS or our shelter partners, again, those would be looking different depending on kind of the medical or social services model that we would be using. So that's a very long introduction to say that it really ranges, but that we have historically definitely been providing different amounts based on a couple of different factors.
Yeah, okay, if it can just
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, just as a follow-up to clarify the answer, and I understand everything that you've said, and it's very helpful. Thank you. The reason you can see probably where I'm going with the question is because, especially for those folks at home, or even for anyone that might one day need some kind of affordable housing, it's important that those numbers are transparent and that people understand that the decisions that we make around builds, because the suggestion often is, well, we should be doing our own housing, but we've just heard from that answer that the operating cost then comes into the picture, and then the cost goes up significantly. That's what I took from your answer. That gives the rationale for why we use partners, why charities and non-for-profits are involved, and they all have different models. However, the one number that is important to know, and it will change over time, is what does it cost to build this stuff? Because that is often the suggestion, and it doesn't matter to me where the money is coming from, whether we're paying 100% of it or whether, for the purpose of the question, there's other levels of government involved, like there is at Wright Crescent. The point is that there's kind of a market rate for how much this stuff costs, depending on what it is, and it seems to be, like you said, in the range between 50 to 150,000. Last week's announcement, it was 125,000. It's in the neighborhood of 100,000, or maybe higher than that nowadays. That's important when we're talking about high numbers of demand. Everybody needs to understand what this stuff costs, and whether we should be building it or whether we should be finding it and including it in private developments. And the difference between private developments and publicly owned assets is important, because they're not the same. We're comparing apples and oranges when you've got a percentage of a building with affordable units because we've mandated it because it's policy, and it expires after 20 years. That's very different from just creating this housing that we, the city government, find the capital money for, presumably with help from other levels of government, and then build. So my second question has to do with what is staff recommending as a general approach along out of the different menu options, as in fully publicly owned, in the spectrum ranging to forcing through policy for the privately owned assets to include affordable housing. If you could just list the different options in descending order of costs to the municipal taxpayer, that would be really helpful, because then folks following along at home could understand the decisions that we make around those issues.
So, Mr. Chair, I believe CAO Hurdle has her hand up.
Sure. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So just to, I will answer the councillor's question, but maybe to add to what Director Nordegraaf was saying around the cost, I would say that for the most part, what we've seen in the last probably 3 to 5 years have been costs closer to 150,000 per unit, especially when we're working with our non-for-profit organization. So the $50,000 range that was mentioned earlier was something that goes way back to when the city started a program, which was about 10 years ago. So I'm sure you can appreciate that the value was quite different at that time. So in terms of the different options that we have for affordable housing, we do have the ability to partner with the private sector. So whether that partnership is in the form of a financial contribution or in the form of a requirement, if council chose at some point to go through a zoning requirement or through a community benefit, typically those units would be around 80% market rent, and they would not exceed a period of 20 years in affordability. The challenge, of course, with those is that you have to plan in 20 years from now, what do we do and how do we replace that stock? So there are different ways we can work with the private sector around those particular units. Currently, though, I will say the only tools that we really have would be the financial contribution or the community benefit, because we currently do not have a zoning bylaw that provides for that requirement. And I know that's something that was discussed by the task force recently on housing. So that's one option. The other option, municipalities usually through Ontario, I'm not aware of municipalities actually owning and operating affordable housing. They usually have a not-for-profit organization or corporation. In the case of Kingston, we have the Kingston Frontenac Housing Corporation and Townhomes Kingston that we work with. And typically with those organizations, the cost is a bit higher for construction, but the affordability is usually maintained in perpetuity, which is a huge, I think, difference from when we're working with the private sector. And I'm not saying that we should only have units with the non-for-profit sector, because those sometimes can take longer to get built than with the private sector. So it all depends. But I think there's opportunity with both. But I do think, and councillors, you'll probably recall that for the most part in the past years, most of our projects have been with non-for-profit organizations. And that's where we typically tend to focus our efforts and energy, although we do have, once in a while, we'll have some collaboration from the private sector.
Okay. I'm just going to add here that when I've talked to KFHC, they indicated that their cost per unit is usually about $172,000. Less if it's one bedroom, closer when it's a two bedroom. And when I put the motion forward for doing the 90 affordable housing units, I used 200,000 in order to make sure we covered that land cost and to take into account that costs tend to rise over time, right? Okay, so next person up is Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Glad to be in this committee. This is my first meeting here, so thanks for having me. I want to pick up on the last point CAO Hurdle made and that Councillor Stroud alluded to in some of his questionings around collaboration with the sector. We heard about the Bath Road build that's happening at 60% of market value per number of units for the next 20 years. It was referenced in the report. Specifically, I'm wondering what the value is in continuing to subsidize or encourage private development at 80% as opposed to 60% or perhaps even lower. Page 9 in the report talks about waiving development fees for those private developers who will do 80% units, 80% of market value that is. So would it not be better to move to a more aggressive target like 60% like we're seeing on Bath Road, especially because prices are so high that even at 80%, most folks wouldn't be able to afford that?
Sorry, it's a little bit of a juggle here to see who's answering the question. I think CAO Hurdle has raised her hand as well, so I will ask her to start.
Great.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So a couple of things. Yes, you're correct, Councillor Kiley, most private developers tend to come in around 80% market rent. And we've been trying over time, and the project that you've named is a good example where we've been able to work with the owner to actually include some 60% market rent, which is more affordable, especially for the population that's being targeted for this particular project, which is supportive housing that we really need in the community. In terms of your question around should we be looking at waiving the fees, I think the comment is there and applicable to anyone that would build affordable housing for development as it applies for development charges, development fees. So that would include non-for-profit organizations. So we do have some non-for-profit as well that build at 80% market rent. So this is meant to capture all builders of affordable housing, regardless if they're for profit or non-for-profit. as long as they have that 80% market rent range.
Okay, I have some more thoughts on that for another time, I think, especially because we're tight tonight for time. My second question is about the West End COVID isolation building that was in my district. I'm just wondering if maybe Director Nordegraaff or CEO Hurdle, you could talk a bit about it, just because it wasn't mentioned in the report. And I'd like to know how many people ended up accessing it, and if there were any lessons we learned about barriers to shelter entry through that process.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So happy to answer that question. So we did not, we obviously did not touch on that in this report, not intentionally, but just really because we wanted to focus on the kind of the next steps in the system, but definitely happy to answer that. So we opened up that facility really in the very early onset of the pandemic, with the focus on it being really a self-isolation center. So not necessarily a shelter, but really a place where people that are homeless and do not have a way to self-isolate, either awaiting their test results or potentially being tested positive to go. So we obviously have, I think the good news is that we did not need that facility as much as we might have initially thought. So we were able to serve about 25 individuals in that facility. The one, I think the good news story is that we were able to also support one individual that did test positive, that we were able to basically divert from the shelter system and other community services. So obviously, again, we were able to kind of respond quickly based on kind of knowing what we needed, and were able to close that facility. I think as for your question regarding the kind of location of services in our community, again, because obviously this facility was not necessarily set up in a way that people were able to kind of move around outside of the facility and go back and forth. I think it's hard to kind of comment on that in this particular situation. I do know that quite often we know clients do access other services, so it is important to have a good kind of geographical location in our community. But I do think that kind of question around location of shelter and where would be good is a really important one that we want to also take into account when we go and review the full kind of system, including obviously having that engagement with actual clients in the system to understand what would really work best for them. Yeah, I think that touches on your question.
Yeah, no, that is helpful. My third and final question, a quick follow-up to it, is that center now closed? Is there a thought about reopening it? I've had a number of residents email me wondering some of the logistics about it. So any information would be helpful.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, the West End facility is closed. We, again, knowing, 6 months, I guess, now into the pandemic, we have a better sense of what we need in kind of that self-isolation piece. Testing and turnaround of testing has obviously improved significantly. So through that lens, I think we have a better sense of kind of how we can support clients that are homeless and would potentially be in that position of being need to be tested. We also have been working with our shelters and our public health partners to have a better kind of plan in place for if that becomes an issue. And the last thing I will say about that is that we are also working with healthcare partners to kind of look at this in a little bit more of a holistic way moving forward, because I think we as a city really stepped up by looking at this as really a preventative measure, and we definitely have kind of moved through this and learned, just like everybody else, what we can do moving forward if we have a second potential wave or how we can approach that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I believe
Mr.
CA Colonel.
Mr. Chair, if I may add just to that. So yes, the center obviously has been the self-isolation center, which was not a shelter, as Director Nordegraf indicated, has been closed. I do want to point out one thing for the committee is that the building itself is designed in such a way that would make some type of supportive housing in the future, though quite practical, because as we know, a number of individuals need the care and the services on site 24/7 and are looking for some sense of community as well in terms of where they reside. So the way that the building was designed, like 113 Lower Union, it does lend itself quite well for that purpose potentially.
Okay, so the next counselor is Counselor Neal. And then Counselor Sen.
Thank you very much.
Any of you, I don't believe.
I appreciate Councillor Stroud's points. We definitely need to do a better job of creating permanent, affordable housing. But I want to focus on the fact that we have a crisis right now. And I have a couple of questions. One, I know that we have a set number of RGI units that the province funds us for. Do we currently have any unassigned RGI units within the system?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. The answer, to the best of my knowledge, is no, or very limited. There might be a few units that are currently being transferred to new tenants, but obviously we work closely with our providers to really work towards having all the units that we have in our system, which is about 2003, available to our clients.
So you're saying that they're all in use now or are in the process of being assigned. Is that accurate?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we are also, as a service manager, mandated to deliver the 2003 units as social housing units through our kind of relationship with the province and the Housing Services Act. So again, like I would not know for sure how many units might be at this point being transferred to other tenants. There might be some providers that might do a few renovations, but to the best of my knowledge, as mentioned, we would have as close to the units that are available being occupied right now.
The reason I asked that question is that I know in the past that there have been good landlords, and that's not an oxymoron, but there have been good landlords that have asked me if there were RGI units, and they'd be quite willing to share those. And I was told at the time that there isn't a provision for that happening. Is there currently a provision for that happening?
Go ahead.
Sorry. There we go. Through you, Mr. Chair, can I clarify your question, Councillor Neal? Are you asking if we have the ability to add more affordable units or RGI units with landlords that are willing?
I'm asking if a single person, say a single homeowner who has a really good secondary suite and are quite willing, and we live in a very caring community, are quite willing to accept an RGI tenant, does the city allow that to happen? Does the city encourage that to happen?
Okay, thanks for clarifying that question through you, Mr. Chair. So I think a few things that I would kind of say to that. First of all, absolutely, if there are willing landlords that have affordable units that they would like to, offer to individuals that need an affordable unit, there are a few ways that we can support that. You might recall that we last year have implemented a portable housing benefits as a way of kind of adding that in the toolbox of our social housing RGI kind of program. This would technically allow, let's say, somebody that is on the social housing wait list and their name comes up on the list, if they, rather than accessing a bricks and mortar social housing unit or a housing unit through the rent supplement program, they could technically use that benefits and access a market unit or an affordable housing unit and basically use that benefits to pay the difference in their income and the actual rent. So that could be an option. The other option that I would like to point out is we have a program, affordable secondary suite program that we have in place to support landlords or individual homeowners that have a secondary suite to kind of get some subsidy, some funding to potentially make some renovations and then offer that unit up to 80% average market to an individual. So that would be another way to increase some of that affordable housing stock. I have not obviously been able to get those numbers based on you asking me the question just now, but I also do know that we have been quite successful in adding secondary suites in our community by allowing to kind of extend that ability more broader into our community. So I think that is certainly a really good opportunity. I think the one thing I will say just to end is, as I mentioned, the RGI piece and the number of RGI units is really a very particular kind of program within our service. And we really are, looking at that kind of 2003 number that we have to deliver or maintain as a community. So I think there's definitely ways to be creative and to look at kind of providing incentives to landlords that are willing to provide those units for an affordable rate.
I appreciate that. I want to point out what Councillor Stroud mentioned before. 80% of CMHC average rental, you have to be solidly middle class or upper middle class to be able to afford it in Kingston. So I think we need to find a better measure. My final question has to do with the fact that I know I've asked this question in past years, in past councils, but as I understand it, there is an emergency fund within the housing budget to be able to accommodate emergency homeless people in motels. It hasn't been utilized in the past, and I believe it's only been utilized when people have been displaced by, families have been displaced by fire or that. Are we indeed utilizing that option now, and are we considering it for accommodating some of our Bell Park campers?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, you are correct. We have the ability to support individuals with hotels or motels, for instance, as you pointed out, through a fire or other ways. We actually have, and also as part of kind of the pandemic, but also even before that, the ability to provide people that are homeless with the option to access a hotel room. I think what we and with our partners do, and we have in the past, it really also depends on kind of the supports that the individual would need while they're accessing, for instance, a hotel or a motel. So we have been working with our partners and with hotels, and there have been hotels that are quite willing to support that. But it does really come back to the ability to have staffing in place to provide that support within the system. So it's definitely on the table. We have been utilizing it. It's typically a more like lower acuity clients that may not need the supports as much, but it's definitely an option, and we have offered it, and we continue to offer it, and we have been utilizing it in the past as well. But it quite often is that really that partnership between or really finding the appropriate staffing and supports to support people while they're in hotels.
So you can assure us that that budget line indeed is being used? Because I've asked this question of some of your predecessors, and the money had never been touched for the year. And yet we have clearly have a homeless crisis. So that budget line has been fully utilized or nearly fully utilized. Is that accurate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have the budget line in front of me, so I'm not sure how much we have spent on that budget line at this point, but I can assure you that we are utilizing that option if we have that opportunity to support a client, either if it's, for instance, a client that's on Ontario Works or social assistance that has been in a fire, but also if the client and the acuity and the staffing all lines up, then we can and have utilized that option. I mean, I know over the last few months we have had clients in hotels to support them. Again, I cannot speak to the actual
I appreciate that.
and the number, but it definitely is an option.
I appreciate that, and I shouldn't have just ambushed you with that question now. I should have sent it to you in advance. Could you get the answer to that and share it with the members of the committee?
Absolutely.
Okay. The next counselor is Counselor Sanik.
Great, thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Through you, I have a question about the tiny homes pilot project. So the report says that there's going to be a pilot project on city property that staff's working with a partner, and it says that we'll be getting an update sometime in 2020. So I just wonder, with COVID, are we still going to be getting an update sometime this fall? And would it be coming to this committee, or will it be coming to council?
So, CEO Hurdle has her hand up.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, the update will come to committee and council this fall. So it will most likely, Councillor Osanik, go to the Housing and Homelessness Committee first, because it is going to be a different kind of project, and also arrangement in terms of tiny homes. So we obviously would like to work with that committee. The fall-winter timeframe is a result of COVID, because we were actually making some pretty good progress before COVID hit, and otherwise we would have probably already been at committee. So obviously, because it does include a city property, there may be a conversation that also is required in closed session with council, depending on how the partnership is structured. So we'll have to look at that. I can I can tell you that it is a non-for-profit organization that we are working with, because I think that question at the Housing and Homelessness Committee as well. There were concerns about some of the private sector developers that are in that particular business. So I just wanted to flag that for the committee, that we are working with a non-for-profit on this project.
Great, thanks so much. The 4 West End councillors, we had a town hall last week, and there was only like 45 people or so that called in, but 3 people specifically asked us about tiny homes. So it seems that there's a definite interest out there in the community that they want to see tiny homes be implemented as, you know, possible solutions to alleviate homelessness. So thanks for that answer. We'll look forward to those details later on. In the report too, it mentions about shelters, and that one of the recommendations in the report is to do a shelter review. And I saw that in the chart that we had, that Lily Place in 2019, it was at 75% capacity, I think it showed, but this past year it was only at 21%. And I know that review hasn't taken place, but I just wondered if staff have any comments about that, if that's a good indication that the occupancy went down, you know, like for families, you don't want to see any, like an entire family be homeless, which I think is what Lily Place is. I think that's for families, like, or is it just women with children? But anyway, it went to 21%. And I don't know if that was because of COVID and like they found, you know, extended family or friends somewhere to live there instead because of COVID, or if it looks like, you know, maybe that's gone down and we'll see it go down next year too, down to the 20% level.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for that question. We definitely will, as part of the whole review, look at the family shelter as well. Actually, you know, obviously this report was, we have been seeing a slight increase again in May and June in the family shelter. So we do, and we can only guess that we do think, and also in conversation with our provider, that it might have been an initial or a short-term kind of decrease, potentially because families might not have felt comfortable to move into a facility with other families. But again, I would not be the expert to kind of report on that at this point, but we definitely will look at that kind of as part of the review. I think what we do see is that the family shelter obviously we have a shelter that is set up in a way, and depending on kind of the size of the family and kind of how that works with the existing kind of families in the shelter, it is always really a bit challenging to reflect the capacity, because you could have capacity and you have maybe a small family that will access the shelter, which works, but then if it's a larger family, that sometimes might be a little bit more challenging to fit in the current setup. What I would like to say, and kind of in follow-up on the question regarding hotels, is that quite often for families, a hotel option or a kind of almost more like a facility with some kind of short-term rental is quite a good overflow option as well. But yeah, to answer your question, definitely are seeing a bit of an increase, and we do have that same kind of interpretation that it might have been, especially in the first few months of COVID, kind of that uncertainty for families of if they want to kind of access a facility like that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Is there any other questions from the committee at this point? And I'll come around in a minute. Again, I'm going to ask a couple questions and then I'll come back. Okay. So, given the report, how many supportive housing units does the city currently need to address the circumstances we face? at Bell Park and elsewhere? So anyone can answer that question?
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that question. I think, to be very transparent, I wish I would have a really exact number. I mean, you have seen, for instance, the number that we have on the by name list, which is giving us a good starting point. We also have been reviewing our, obviously through the 10-year housing and homelessness plan work, we know that there is definitely a gap. I think the complexity at this point, and I think that that is also part of kind of some of the conversations that we would like to have moving forward, is that we know that we have a multitude of wait lists. We obviously have our own social housing wait list, which would also include some individuals that would be looking at a supportive or a social housing supportive units. We also have partners that have their own individual wait lists with clients that are in need for supportive housing. So, and there probably is some overlap on those wait lists as well. So as part of the kind of work that we're doing right now is not only reviewing our own social housing wait lists and better understand kind of the needs, we also have that ability to work with our partners. And quite recently, the province has also signaled to service managers that they will allow communities to move towards not just a social housing wait list or a individual wait list for specific supportive housing providers, but to move towards a housing wait list that is community-wide. So that would allow us a bit of a better understanding to really get a good sense of the numbers. So full transparency, I mean, we have different lists and different understanding, but to really give you a clear answer on it's like 500 or 200 or 95, I would not feel comfortable to give you that answer at this point.
So why isn't the number 135?
Well, through you, to you, Mr. Chair, I think that is definitely a really good starting point. But I think we also have to keep in mind that there might be people that are currently housed and might be provided with support services, or might have family or members that are supporting them. So I think that is a really good point. I mean, it's definitely at least 135. I would assume it's more. But from the homelessness system and having the ability now to really work through the by name list, which is a new tool that we have implemented earlier this year, gives us a really good starting point to truly understand kind of from the homelessness system what the needs are. I think what I would like to add is that there is quite often also other sometimes it is a concurrent piece, right? There might also be some, developmental issues or other pieces. So that's where other agencies quite often come in as well with some of their supportive housing. So to kind of wrap it up, I definitely think that the 135 is the minimum.
Okay, that's good, because what I was after obviously was a critical number to address the circumstances that we now immediately face. I realize people will couch surf and all that sort of thing, but or stay with friends and all that, but if they're on the street, this is clearly our immediate, that I'm definitely dealing with on a daily basis. So my other question is what happens when the artillery park closes September 30th? What are we aiming to have in place? I know there's an answer in here, but it's kind of vague.
Through you, so as identified in the report, and I recognize that it's vague because we are working on that as we speak. We are securing a longer term location for an integrated care hub as initiated at Artillery Park. So the idea is obviously, and that's kind of identified to council, and I believe it was back in the June council meeting, this pilot will end obviously by the end of September, but the focus is to continue this service after. But obviously we are working on that as we speak, and are hoping to be able to get back to council with some options shortly. I know CEO Hurdle has her hand up as well, so she might be interested in adding some information there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that question. So we are working, actually we're narrowing down a few options in terms of potential relocation before the end of September for this service. We anticipate this service will continue to be needed in the community, just like the warming center last winter was quite, I think, quite helpful in the community. So we do see a need to continue, obviously, this service. So I know that's not probably what councillors will like to hear, but we may have to bring an added report or look at a special council of meeting if we have information that we can move fairly quickly with in terms of a change of location. We would need a direction from council, and unfortunately, as you know, if we wait until early September, that may be challenging to be able to move by the end of the month. So we recognize that that time is of the essence, but we want to also make sure that we bring back to council an option that works for the program and the community, and also looking at ways in terms of how this program will be financially supported in the future. We have started to have conversations as well with the province, because we recognize that a significant portion of the services that are provided in that integrated care hub are healthcare services, to be completely frank, and that does need obviously some provincial support in the long term.
Fair enough. Clearly, this is crucial. If we're closing Bell Park, then that's based on the idea, it seems to me, that we're going to have something to replace the cooling center at the end of September. And I'll get back. That's my point for now. I've got other points about this, but I see Councillor Bone, but Councillor Stroud was first. Okay. Councillor Stroud, can you hear me? You had a question, I think. You raised your hand.
That's right. I do have a question, and it doesn't need to be answered today with anything other than a timeline. If the answer is not available today, I'd just like to know when it will be available. But the question is, because in the report, there's several references to the 90 affordable housing units at 1316 Princess Street, which is a new housing development on a city-owned property, and it relates to the question I had earlier. However, there's no mention in the report of the aging assets of some of the non-for-profit agencies that are currently supplying affordable housing that may actually come to the end of their useful life. And I know we've talked about it before, and I can understand that it's not, you can't put everything into a report like this. But my question would be, what do we know at this point about the aging affordable housing stock that might need replacement in the next, say, 10 years? Like, how many units are we talking about that are kind of in that aging category? And when will we have more information about that? Because we need to start planning for that as well. It's all well and good to say we're building 90 new units as part of a development at 1316 Princess, but we need to know what assets are expiring as well.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Thanks for that question. And that is definitely a really important piece. And we did not put that in this report because it definitely requires probably a very fulsome conversation on its own. You might recall that we have, we have done some work on the end of operating and end of mortgage agreements, and we're definitely working our way through that. And to your question, you're absolutely right that we do need to have that conversation. We can definitely prepare that for a next ARC meeting to give you some insights or a bit of an update on kind of where that stands. Again, that really also goes back to some of the provincial direction that we have received on the end of operating and end of mortgage agreements. But we can definitely commit to bring that back to the next Arts, Recreation and Community Services Committee.
Okay, thank you. I should have said something earlier that if staff needs to come to the council or this committee because they've got a line on a building that replaces the cooling center, I'm quite sure that the committee would be willing to facilitate that. I see nodding heads everywhere. So, because I think we recognize we're in a critical situation. And I'm quite sure we only meet every couple of months. And the last time was what, January or something? So that goes for the last question as well, I think. We're not saying staff has time to do that between now and the next one, but the Councillor Bohm, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everybody hear me okay? All right. Yeah, I guess my question was just in regards to next steps after Artillery Park closes as the cooling center and what possible locations we're looking at, just because some of the concerns that I've heard and some of the things mentioned are basically like a central location in essence and access to other resources. So is that something that's being considered as far as where the next phase would be after Artillery Park? Because if we locate it in a spot that is, I guess, not accessible or less accessible for those who are needing to access it, we kind of create an additional issue, which is how do the people who need to access it actually access it, and in turn then get access to the other resources that they need.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm not sure that you can see that I've raised my hand, but to respond to Councillor Bohm's question, absolutely, the various sites and properties that we are looking at right now and having conversations about with different property owners are all centrally located. So we are very mindful of that. We understand that an integrated care hub is different than housing, for example, where people may be comfortable in terms of housing being in, the west end or the east end of the city. We understand that when it comes to either shelter services and this integrated care hub, it needs to be centrally located. We saw that through the relocation of some of our shelter services during COVID-19. So we got that message quite loud and clear. The other thing too is we're looking at the surrounding areas because we know I'm sure you're seeing some of the emails that are coming through as well, but there are definitely a lot of concerns right now from surrounding neighbors with Artillery Park. So we are mindful of the neighborhood and the surroundings of the future location and more permanent location.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Okay, I don't see any. I've got a couple more myself, but Councillor Kiley, go ahead.
That's better, I think. Sorry, Mr. Chair. One, I do just want to clarify in talking about issues related to Bell Park that I emailed to Director Nordegraaff earlier. I'm just wondering how many the 135 people on our homelessness list that was mentioned in the report, do we know to have been encamped at Bell Park? In other words, were there additional individuals that we didn't have on that list who were in the encampment over the last 2 months?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that question, which is an excellent question. I think what we have, we actually have been quite happy to have that ability to use our by name list, because it does have, it has shown us, and maybe to kind of step back one step, the by name list is a tool that all of our community agencies can use to basically capture clients that are either in the shelters or living rough. And so it really gives us that kind of integrated opportunity to have one list with a really kind of real-time understanding of how many people we to our best kind of estimate are considered homeless or chronic homeless. I would say that as we have introduced this late 2019, I would say the accuracy is about I would say we have about a 5 to 10% variance while we're still kind of updating and innovating this list. To your question, so each individual at Bell Park that has received service from one of our agencies has been added to the list, either, and there's two ways to add people to the list. Obviously, there is the ability to identify somebody on the list with their information. So there is that kind of integrated care possibility between agencies. But if people don't want to be added to the list, we can also still add that individual without going into any kind of information or names and other pieces of information about the client. So long story short, we are feeling pretty confident that everybody at Bell Park is on that list. And I think further to that point, obviously, we also with this by name list have the ability to really see trends and kind of, things that might change in the next little while. So for instance, if, and I know we've had questions around this, if we suddenly see an increase in clients from other communities that are accessing our services, we would be able to see that through the by name list as well as a service manager, and we would be able to address it. We also would, for instance, be able to see things around a gender, age, self-identification. There's really a lot of opportunity to really use that information on the by name list to respond. And you might see in the report as well, and this is new because we did not have that tool up until about 6 months ago. It really allows us to have that real-time information and to respond to that accordingly. So basically short answer is yes, the people at Bell Park to the best of our ability and with our partnerships with our partners have been added, and we can have really that kind of basically day to day or week to week kind of data updates.
I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I thought there was a follow-up question maybe. Anyone else on the committee got any other questions? Councillor Neal.
Great, thank you very much. Couple of quick questions. I know that we being the city, has publicly stated that we would be attending Bell Park and helping to facilitate their moves. And I know our community partner agencies have been going there faithfully on a daily basis. It's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there haven't been city staff there this week. Could you comment on that? And is there still a commitment to be facilitating whatever their needs are? If you could answer that, that would be great.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So in the past, we've had definitely Joanne Boris has been quite engaged from a city staff perspective and has been to Bell Park multiple times in Ruth's team, and I believe that Mitch Grange has been as well on the site. As far as this week, yeah, our commitment has been to be able to have dialogue directly, and that's what we're hoping that we can accomplish directly, one-on-one with people that are still there. And it's really just a dialogue. We're not looking to make this an event per se. We want to be able to reach out individually to people. So that's still our intent, to be able to proceed with that this week.
I appreciate that. That's the intention that was committed to, I believe, last week as well. And so I take it from your answer that you still intend to do that, but it hasn't happened yet.
Through Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay. My last question, and I did send an email, I believe, to Lenny, to CAO Hurdle, I believe last week. The primary shelter supplier has much fewer uptake in that. Now, are we still paying them on the basis of bed usage, and are we still flowing that money to them? The reason I ask is that there could be some needs that grow from us having a more aggressive approach to trying to alleviate the homeless situation. And if we're still paying them as if they have full shelters, that's kind of counterproductive. Could you speak to that, please?
Mr. Chair, sorry, Ruth, just wanted to remind the chair and members of the committee that it is 7:20 and that we, I think, are still set to lose quorum at 7:30. So just to remind the chair. Anyways,
I appreciate that.
Go ahead, Ruth.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that question. So we're definitely looking at, again, as part of the system as a whole, kind of looking at the needs and the agreements and the expenses. Just one kind of piece there. So I guess absolutely we are looking at kind of the full picture from both a client and financial client needs, kind of services and financial kind of model. We are, I mean, the way that our system has been set up is not on a per diem. So it's not like based on nights and stays. It is, we have existing service level agreements with our providers with certain kind of expectations and deliverables. Again, that obviously would be part of a bigger kind of conversation that we would like to have in the next few months. Keep in mind that although shelter capacity might have gone down, there might have been there might be a few additional costs such as cleaning and screening that the shelter is incurring. So it's not necessarily a conversation around like just the kind of the reduction of clients, but we definitely are having those conversations with our providers across the board. You know, obviously our youth services, our adult shelter, and I think that's really an important question to ask moving forward.
I appreciate that, and I know that there are additional costs such as cleaning. I guess, though, it concerns me if we're paying for what was a contract established with the idea of having full service, and because of the situation we're in, it's only partial service or minimal service that's being provided. I would hope that in future, because this unfortunately may not be the only COVID crisis that we face over the coming future. Perhaps we can have some protection within whatever contracts we give out to service providers. So thank you.
Thank you. There may be other questions, but it's 7:23. I know I have questions, but so I'm going to ask that I don't think we have any public, Mr. Clerk.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
So I'm going to ask someone to make the motion so we can get it on the floor. And then we can ask all the questions we like after that, if we like, well, up to 7 minutes. Councillor Stroud moves and Councillor Sinek seconds. So the motion is on the floor. Is there anyone that got any additional comments they can do in the next few minutes? I believe Councillor Stroud has to go to work. Is that correct, Councillor Stroud? No? Councillor Kylie, you're going to leave, right? Okay, Councillor Bohm's already left. No, okay, we're fine. Well, we'll still be fine. We'll have 4. Okay. I thought Councillor Stroud had to leave. My apologies. Okay, any comments from the council or questions from the committee? Councillor Stroud, did you have your hand up? No? Yes. I recognize you.
Just a quick comment. My last question, and Ms. Nordegraaf, Director Nordegraaf, mentioned that perhaps at the next meeting of this committee, we could have a report about the aging assets for affordable housing. I mean, the timeline is up to staff, as long as maybe I'd be happy by the end of the year, but it's just something that needs to be included in the conversation. And I think I'm happy to leave it as that, just to make sure that we do get that aging asset information before too long. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, I've got a couple. I think it's we're in kind of tough. That's what I read out of this. And there are a number of situations where, well, first of all, I want to say thank you to staff for the work they've done. It's been really tough. The cooling center seems to be working out. It was really good to get that in place. Not everybody agrees with it, as councillors probably know. I certainly have heard about it. But my answer to people is, what's your alternative? You know, it really doesn't exist. So at the moment, so we're trying to do that now. And this is a particularly difficult situation, which it was difficult to begin with, but the pandemic has made it much worse. So what's concerning here, and I think staff are sort of flying the flags at us here, is so many of these initiatives are dependent on financial contributions from partners or other agencies or the provincial government. One can hope for federal contributions, but I don't see that really isn't mentioned that often in here. And so I've identified myself, for instance, 113 Lower Union, we need partners to operate and deliver the services. We in general need it because that's identified in the 10-year plan. And there's a number of other places where we have identified that we could do things if we could get additional capital and or operating funds. So what often happens is that doesn't get done because we don't get those contributions. And so that's really rather concerning. I'm also concerned about The, I know that it says we're gonna do the 90 units at 1316 Princess Street. And as part of 160 units. And I would like to see more about how we're gonna do that. Because the amount of capital money that was committed during council's strategy priorities has been dropping. And the last thing I read was, well, it's down to about 12.5 million. So, and Councillor Stroud was kind of getting at that. And in a way, Councillor Neal and Councillor Stroud were talking about it too, when they were talking about 80% of market. So those are concerning points where I think we need more information as a committee and as a council. So we have an idea whether we can actually get there. And I know the other thing I wanted to point out is staff have correctly identified that we need a facility that involves mental health and addiction and community services in a one-stop context. And I think that's clearly looking at the Bell Park situation in particular, but in other situations that staff and myself are having to deal with at Artillery Park and at the street health and Doug Fleur Park. Bell Park's not the only problem we've got. So it's that kind of facility that we need. And of course, we need funding. Can't do it without funding. So either our own, and hopefully with provincial supports. And I would point out that we have the debt capacity. That was indicated to us in the last two budgets, as far as the capital side is concerned. Although I will note, as Councillor Neal would say many, many times, that capital you can get, operating not so easy to get. So that's all I've got to say at the moment. Yeah, but we do have some answers to those things.
Mr. Chair, I believe the CAO would like to make a comment.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for those comments, questions. I'm going to be very brief. You're absolutely right that we do need support from other agencies and other levels of government, especially on the operating side. I think from a capital perspective, we will be bringing more information this fall, winter on 1316 Princess Street. That one and others are easier to achieve from a capital perspective. The biggest issue that we have is those types of housing units that do require ongoing services, especially on the mental health addiction, which includes the integrated care hub. We're not equipped to finance that. Those are typically healthcare dollars, and that we absolutely need the support of the provincial government there to make this work in the long term.
Thank you for that. Anything else from the committee? Okay, I'll ask for the vote.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
sorry, just a reminder that for this report to make it to the next council meeting on August 11th, there is a need for the committee,
yes,
if it so desires, to just amend the initial clause so that it can be reported out to next Tuesday's meeting. It'll be included on an addendum going out this Friday if the committee passes such an amendment. And I think James can pop that up if needed, but it seems pretty clear.
Thank you for that reminder. I think
James is just putting it on the screen. There we go.
Oh, okay. Can we put that in as an amendment to the standing motion?
That's correct. So you moved
Okay.
and seconded, so we can amend it. I think we can probably take that off the screen and get a mover and seconder now.
Okay, moved by Councillor Stroud, seconded by Councillor Neal, excuse me. And the reporting out, everybody's clear about what's happening here. We're sort of jumping the queue a bit, but I think we all recognize why it needs to be done. So all those in favor of the amendment to the motion? Okay, that passes unanimously. Now the motion itself is on the floor. Do I have a mover and seconder? No, we already had that. Now we have it amended, so we're all set to go. So all those in favor of the motion, and that passes. I take it we got that right, Mr. Clerk?
Yep, well done.
Okay, so that's that. We've done the report card, and I missed 7B. It's right here. Report from Arts Advisory Committee. It's an appointment that Arts Advisory Committee reports and recommends as follows. The names there are appointed to the Mayor's Arts Awards Nominations Working Group. Do I have a mover? Councillor Stroud, Councillor Sanic, could you do that? Thank you, because Councillor Neal probably doesn't think that's appropriate. So, and we know what a stickler is. So, and it's good. So all those, does anyone have anything to say about this? You know, okay, 1, 2, 3, we're done with that. Okay, all those in favor? Okay, thank you, that passes. Item 8 is motions. There are none. 9, notices of motion. Seeing none. 10, other business. 11, correspondence. 12, date and time of next meeting is October 22nd, but I have a feeling it might be sooner than that based on what the CAO and Ms. Nordegroff said. And I'm presuming we're all in for that if we have to be. So number 13 is adjournment, a mover for adjournment, Councillor Neal, a big rush. Anyone else? Councillor Sanic? All those in favor? We're done, we're adjourned. Thank you so much, everybody. It was a bit touch and go there at the beginning. I was glad to find out that I wasn't the only one that was having technical problems. And so I was thinking, I can't even get a hold of them. You know,
We're all in it together, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we're all out of it together there. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to staff and Kirk, everyone, CAO, thank you so much. Okay.